Right on. We're going to talk global now. Going global is the desirable target of so many organizations, but that journey is littered with hurdles that include financial, legal, and of course, organizational challenges. So what's the best way to spread your organization's products and solutions literally around the world? Well, our next speaker is Vice President of Global E-commerce at Grainger and is responsible for the company's global multi-channel digital solutions as well as corporate innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vice President of Global Commerce at Grainger, Paul Miller. Hello, Paul. Oh, let me have a look at that. Oh, it's got the number 9 in his number. It's one of my favorites.
Oh, good.
Welcome, and thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks.
As is now tradition with my little conversations on the stage, would you like to add a little bit more to the intro I gave? Let the audience know what it is you really do and a bit more about Grainger. I
wish I knew what I really did. Now, Grainger is one of those companies that a lot of folks outside of B2B had no idea even exists. It's a almost $10 billion global company, distributor of industrial supplies, all the stuff that organizations need to keep their facilities running and to keep their people safe. All those little things like the light bulbs, the bolts, the carpet fasteners, the motors, all this random stuff. 1 million products, in fact.
That's phenomenal. We'll come on to that a bit later on. You are, in all honesty, advanced. You've been at this for quite a while. You're sitting now in a position of maturity. Do you still see great opportunity lying ahead in B2B e-commerce?
Was that actually calling me old?
I was calling your business established.
Okay. Grainger was a pioneer in e-commerce. I think it was back in like 94, 95. The company launched their first direct site. And it was before it really had taken off. And I think at the time there were folks that thought that Grainger would spin off everything other than e-commerce and would become an e-commerce company.
Right.
The pendulum swung so far that time that I think it just was premature. I think it swung back and almost swung too far, 10 years after that, where it was a business that was driving over $1 billion of revenue, but really hadn't been invested in. It hadn't been fostered to the level of attention that it really needed. Call it 2009, 2010, we really started to invest. And we started by investing in people. One of the things that Jay said that I think is probably one of the most important is starting with what you want to get done, who are the right people to do it?
Right.
And we started, I was one of the early hires into what we now have as, our robust group. And I come from a marketing background, CPG marketing originally, and B2C e-commerce. And I've then, taken that as a framework to bring in the right kind of folks to be able to take us to that next level.
Now, if I was sitting in the audience right now, I'd be like, well, it was easy for you. You were hiring at a time nobody else was, or very few were. Now, if we go out to the marketplace, we've already heard this, there's nobody around.
Well, I think it all comes down to how you differentiate. When we were hiring back in 2010, 2011, there were a lot of people that looked at Grainger and said, really? I'm going to sell screws and light bulbs and replacement motors? And we were competing with people who really had tons of different choices. We have an office up in Lake Forest. I don't know how many folks here are local, but drive north about 30 miles, and that's where our office is. Beautiful building. But if you're looking for 20-something e-commerce professionals, they don't really want to be schlepping up there. So one of the things we did is we opened up an e-commerce innovation center downtown. And it's been a huge win for us to be able to create the right kind of recruiting brand, bring the right kind of people in, and be able to foster that type of work environment that you really need to be successful in this zone.
Even in a digital global business, what you're saying is location matters.
Location, location, location.
For the right people.
Yeah, and it also comes down to how do you have that space organized? Our space is a pretty cool, it's a very cool space, but it's also been designed for the type of work that our people do. We leverage agile development, and all the folks from the different parts of the organization, whether they're in IT, whether they're in product management, user experience, they're sitting together at these teams, co-located by sprint team. So it's not just about having a cool location and a cubicle farm. Right. It's about having the kind of space that really fosters the type of work that these people do.
Does your organization pay over the market odds for the talent, or is it all about the location and the cool atmosphere and the setup?
I think as a company, some of our values actually play through and help us from a recruiting standpoint. It's a long-standing, very stable company. Stock has gone through the roof. Our profit-sharing trust pays well. And so those are the kind of things that folks that are entering other types of organizations, they don't necessarily get to benefit from those types of things. Do we have to pay at market? For sure. I mean, we're not going to underpay.
No.
But I think when you start leveraging the stability that a multi-billion-dollar company has and can bring to it, that's when I think you really start to be able to blend the best of both worlds.
All right, great ideas on people. But going back to that kind of starting position when you were drafted into the organization, because yes, the site existed before you, but since you've arrived, it's like there's the hockey stick again, all obviously because of you. But tell us a bit more about processes. Tell me more about technology. What did you have to make happen within Grainger?
Yeah, well, when you think about the way you build an e-commerce business, there are several fundamentals. You have to start by thinking about who is your audience, who are your customers, where are they? And one of the things that we saw at Grainger from a starting place standpoint is we were not where our customers were in terms of how they started their research. A quick example, most of us have probably used that site called Google. I don't know if people have heard of that, but pretty famous site. Our customers are no different. They are starting looking for products the same way that we start by looking for anything. And at the time, we had probably about 600,000 products. We had about 7,500 keywords that we were bidding on Google. Now, you look at that and you compare that to today, we've got around 1 million products, and we've got almost 6 million keywords that we bid on.
Wow. So that pays off, that investment in Google keywords?
Pays off dramatically. And I'm just using that as an example of where are your customers and how do you start attracting them. But that e-commerce math equation starts with traffic, but then it continues with conversion and average order value.
Right.
And not to oversimplify things, but if you don't have the same kind of focus on understanding what your customer is looking to do and then delivering that, and that's the right products, that's certainly the right price point, but that's thinking about how do you augment their experience with the types of things they need to make the right decision. And I think the thing I've learned most in B2B is that it's not like when you're buying a book or a CD or something and you buy it and maybe you bought that ebook and it wasn't that good. Oh, well, I wasted $10.
Right.
But in B2B, when you think about the decisions that people are making, there's actually a risk involved in being wrong.
Oh, hugely so. Your job is on the line.
Your job's on the line, and there are people in your facility that if you buy that wrong piece and that production line goes down or that fall resistance or restraint stuff isn't working properly, there's people's lives that are actually at risk.
Nice.
So the B2B buyer has a lot more that they have to be able to do very, very quickly. And this is where I look at some of the competitors out there, some of the emerging competitors. They don't start from that point of trust that a trusted distributor, such as Grainger, but there's plenty of others in this room here, start from. And you have to find ways of leveraging that because that is going to drive conversion.
Okay, so what are those decision factors? Because we saw from Jay's presentation, wherever Jay is, depth of content, there was even some videos, there's extra things you can do, reviews seem to be important. Does this matter in the B2B world? What are people looking for?
Well, thankfully, he showed a couple examples of where it matters on Grainger, so I'm a believer. But it doesn't actually matter what I think. It doesn't even matter what my key leaders think. It matters with how the customers vote. And one of the things that we've realized is that, and I've learned this long ago, and it's never been more important than in my role at Grainger and in B2B, you have to establish testing platforms. You have to establish whether it's A/B testing and using a service like Adobe offers or things that you build yourself, how do you get things out there? And so things like decision support tools, enhanced content, or mobile applications, how do you get these things out there in a way that you can test and iterate? Because when you can, it takes any of the questionability off it. It takes any level of subjectivity off the table.
Even if you fundamentally disagree, if you've always thought this is never going to work, and then it does, and the testing proves it, that's all that matters.
We did a great test. I've had the good fortune of being able to present to our board a number of times, and we showed them that we had built this A/B testing functionality. And what we did essentially is we said, all right, here are 4 things that we just tested on our homepage. And we asked these folks who are very expert on our business, most of them have been on the board for quite some time, we said, pick the winner. And I've done this several times, and each time you cross your fingers and you hope it works the same way. And as I'm sure you all can guess, very few people actually picked the winner. And that was awesome. Because what it meant was the folks that were in the room there that were purported experts and do have expertise in key areas, they didn't pick the winner. No. But our customers did, and we're actually able to attribute a certain level of financial benefit to that winner that you then extrapolate and you build out. And I think what that starts to do, when you combine that with things like voice of the customer, where you've got hundreds, if not thousands of customers that you lock into a series of panels or other things to get feedback from them, you're able to be, again, very objective, very focused on fact-driven types of decisions. You drive things that are driving value, and it just becomes kind of a drumbeat, a 20-mile march, if you will, towards getting up to the top of that hill.
Right. To an extent, you're in a position where you have the luxury to be able to A/B test, to try things out. Some people in our audience are just at the beginning of the journey, and to them it's like, let me just get something out there. Let me get this thing rolling. Any pointers on getting started that you haven't covered already?
You know, I think one of the things in terms of getting started is setting expectations appropriately.
Within the business?
Within the business, outside of your area of expertise. But you know, if you're running e-commerce and you're within a large multi-channel type of organization, there are going to be lots of folks that have their opinion.
Yes.
And I think in a lot of cases, you're almost forced into, you know, how big is this business going to be? What's it going to do for me? How does it integrate with these other pieces? I think it's important to open the very strong lines of communication, to lead with facts. If you're using a strong integrator, somebody like an Acuity or other folks, how do you leverage some of their expertise to bring some of that to the table so that your stakeholders actually recognize what's about to happen? What is the complexity? And recognize that there is a lot of complexity. Content. You think about 1 million products. Think about how much content we have to build. Well, the folks that are on the product management side, you know, in procurement, they're looking at this, and you know, they might be thinking with a certain window. Well, guess what? If you're building it for a website that's got millions of visitors a month, there's different perspectives. So it's about building those lines of communication, setting expectations, pulling in outside expertise where you can to really build up that picture, and just keeping your shoulder into it and know that it's not an instant flip of the switch and you're done. There's a lot more that it takes to really be successful.
And when it comes to setting expectations, should people try the Scotty approach? And you know, famously, Scotty would go, "It'll take me 2 hours, Captain," but he knew he could do it in 1.
I thought you'd do the accent for that.
Ah, thank you.
You know, I don't know. I'm a real fan of transparency. I think that one of the things that really hurts a lot of organizations is when they're overly conservative in terms of both ends of the spectrum when you're building a business case, that you know, you'll overly discount the value of something, and at the same time you'll overestimate how much it's going to take to build it.
Right.
So I'm not saying be unrealistic, but I think you have to build that right speed, if you will, that right level of depth around a business case, and be willing to sign up for it.
All right. Once again, you can ask questions to our fabulous guest from Grainger. The number, once again, 22333, and you've got to pre-see it with 590408, and I'll see those questions in just a minute. We were chatting before, and you said that in many ways, this isn't even about technology, it's about change management, both internal and external. So when you're dealing with the difficult opinion of the hippo, you know what the hippo is, right? Highest paid person in the room's opinion. When you're dealing with that opinion and it's wrong, how do you go about changing? How do you go about managing that change?
Well, again, you know, I think that the benefit that you have when you're running an organization that has you know, an existing business is you can test things. And I know not every organization can build out as robust of a testing facility. But I think even starting with, you know, how do you pull in even a small number of users? How do you start to disassociate it from just the hippo's opinion and make it more fact-based?
Yeah. Let's talk global then. That's how I tagged it at the beginning. What have been some of the key challenges you faced in taking your business global?
Back in like, you know, 98, 99, 2000, people talked about having multiple channels. And then there was this flip where we talked about being multi-channel. Now we've translated it to omni-channel. I'm actually allergic to that word just for fun. But
you are?
I still believe in multi-channel. But I remember when that flip happened, and it wasn't just about having different channels, but how do you start to think about the customer at the center of it, and how do you build stuff out that appropriately leverages that? Well, where I'm seeing global right now is that there's some similar thinking. Grainger is a perfect example of a company that does, you know, billions of dollars outside of America, but we're still really set up more as a US-centric company. And the transition that we're trying to make is to have at the center some of the things that are consistent across different countries. Some of the technology stack decisions like platform, or the way you're going to handle paid search, but also recognizing that in country there are things that are very specific. And not to try to just inject in what works in the US, but to really understand those different markets and to do things appropriately. You know, we lost some money by trying some things quickly in China, and we didn't succeed.
Right.
And I think it's now back to the point where you say, well, how does that market operate differently? What are the central assets that I can leverage? And then how do I layer on top of that the right kind of in-country sort of solutions?
There's going to be a temptation to be somewhere for the sake of being somewhere, even if you're getting it wrong. Is that the wrong decision?
I think that that's a decision that can be hugely debilitating on a number of levels. No company has infinite financial resources, and so just the distraction factor and the dissipation of your assets, I think could be hugely damaging. I think that it has to come from a point of discipline. What would I stand for in that market with my existing brand? What are other ways to get in there? Sometimes an acquisition is a better way to get into a country.
Yeah, and I want to talk about M&A if we have time. But here are some questions from the audience. I'll quick fire them, and you can do quick answers back. Question 1, I noticed you get great attribute content. How did you get your suppliers to get on board and provide this data?
We put their arms behind their back and we wrench up really, really hard. It's a partnership. We have several thousand suppliers, many suppliers, or I should say a small number of suppliers drive a lot of the volume, so building really strong relationships with them. We were able to test and show that when we have enhanced content, when we have deeper attribute content, we actually drive more sales, which doesn't just help us, it helps them.
Right.
And so it's been through that we've built really strong partnership.
Okay, great. What do you use for the voice of the customer?
Several things. We're using 4C Results and Opinion Labs. We use both of those on our site and on our mobile platforms to try and capture both that in-the-moment feedback that comes in, as well as stuff that we will reach out to people and survey them. We also have a proprietary stack that we've been building with, I think it's now over 1,000 customers, various segments represented, various tenure of customer represented. And we use that every time we're launching a new feature or function, every time we're thinking about radically changing things, or even not even radically, like making some decent changes, we're leveraging the customer panel to do so.
Wow. Do you ever sit there and look at the results of the customer panel and think, no, you're wrong? You're just wrong.
But it doesn't matter what I think.
Okay. Okay, I like that. How do you feel about current suppliers to Grainger developing their own B2B commerce? How do you balance that relationship?
I think you just boycott them.
Right. Without even letting them know.
Look, it's been channel conflict, if you will, has existed from the start of e-commerce. Whether that's internal channels within a company, whether that's a manufacturer who is essentially competing with their distributor or with retailers, it has existed forever and it will exist. I think the reality is, again, you have to build strong relationships with your customer, you have to know who your customer is, and you have to over-deliver. And there are going to be times when the manufacturer is in a much better position to answer that customer's question and to help them. Does that mean that they're in the best position to sell them that product? Not necessarily. So I think if you start by understanding what are your customers trying to do, what's the information they need, what's the kind of experience, then you build the right kind of linkages. And there are going to be sales that you're going to lose that are going to go directly to your manufacturer's website. Some are going to go to your competitors, and vice versa. I think it's a very large ecosystem with lots and lots of opportunity. I don't think it's a binary. It's either on or off. You're either selling to me or you're selling against me.
Right.
I don't think that's the answer.
What a refreshing view that is. Okay, couple more from the audience. If you could go back in time and do one thing over differently, what would you redo?
That's such a broad question.
It's hugely broad, isn't it? Within the business.
Oh, okay. Ooh, that narrows it down a little bit. I think that I've had this happen a couple different times where you join an organization and there's kind of a bill of goods that's been sold. And prior leadership, prior management, not even to discern how they got to that position, but they're in position where they've set expectations. And I think for me, coming into Grainger, I probably was the most mature and realistic in understanding that the folks that were outside of the e-commerce group, for example, didn't actually recognize what it was going to take to get things done.
Right.
And we were able to gain some momentum and build a great team and build great capabilities, but it took time.
Yeah.
And as I look back and I think about that, some of that's in before you even join a company, really understanding that. But some of it, I think, is just being ready to hit the ground running, understand the organization well enough, but really get them to that next level quickly. Because if you don't, and some of that's people, some is facility, some is technology, but if you don't get to that right place, you're not going to be able to execute on what your vision is.
When you benchmark yourselves, you sit back, you look at what's going on, especially in terms of your global operation, do you compare yourselves with the B2C organizations or the B2B, or a bit of both? All
the time, across the board, both. And I think that was one of the things that, initially when I started at Grainger, people were like, why are you showing us, kayak.com? Why are you showing us mint.com?
Right.
Why are you showing us Google when you're talking about search? And of course, Amazon. Because the reality is, and not to overstate the point that's been carried forward by many different folks in this forum and others, our customers are just consumers. They're shopping these websites. They're dealing with these companies. And in some cases, the experience we need to deliver is truly a B2B experience that a consumer never experiences. So don't lose sight of what's special about B2B, but also don't think that just looking at B2B competitors is going to paint the vivid enough picture. And be willing to be self-critical.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that we did in my team is we actually eliminated the color yellow. You know how there's red, yellow, and green? Well, we eliminated yellow because if something isn't ready, if it's not there, then it's probably red, and that's okay. And be willing to be self-critical and to say, well, what's it going to actually take to get that next level? Whether that's an experience or whether that's timing, how do you get there? And not to be rooted in, well, this is how we've done it, and this is, you know, the pace.
Right, just really great words of wisdom. Our time is pretty much up, but a quick question on M&A. You did mention it. What's the connection then between M&A or M&A activities and Outlook and the wonderful world of e-commerce, B2B e-commerce?
It's a tough question to answer in terms of, you know, any company plans, but I think the reality is you always have to look at, am I best to build something or am I best to buy something?
Right.
And you can look broadly at that in terms of features and functions. Should you be using a software as a service vendor? You know, we use LivePerson for our click-to-call, click-to-chat. Well, that might not be acquisition. We haven't bought the company. But in essence, the thought process is very similar. It's us looking at that and saying, should we buy that? Should we build it? And I think similarly, when you look globally, there's ways to enter countries where you're in there and you're building something from scratch. Others where you're saying, am I better to buy into something or do a joint venture with somebody? And I think that, you know, the more that firms like ours and others around here are looking more holistically like that, I think the better off that we're all going to be.
Wonderful. Last question really is, look at everyone. We're all in this room in the same industry. How far is everyone sitting down in front of you right now in the right industry?
We're all absolutely in the right industry. I think the opportunities are immense. I was so excited being in B2C when you see the kind of migration that happens with customers starting to buy online. And one of the speakers earlier was like, oh, are people actually going to buy online? And we had that at Williams-Sonoma. The chairman of the company was convinced we'd never sell anything online. And they sell well over $1 billion of kitchenware and home furnishings. When I think about B2B, the prize is even bigger. And I think about the loyalty that you have from your customers as being even deeper. You mean something to them. You're helping them to do their job and to solve problems. And that's a much deeper relationship than you can have in any other industry. And so solving it pays off in spades.
It's great. Paul Miller, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That was fun. Thank you.